On this day in history, back in 1871, January 28th, the French surrendered to the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War. And the sudden, unexpected collapse of France in that war created a partial power vacuum in Europe that was to trouble the world enormously over the next 100 years. Now, when I say the French surrendered to the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, I mean it's one of the times they surrendered to the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War. It began when the vainglorious Napoleon III led his armies into the trap at Sedan, and they were forced to surrender in September of 1870, and that led to the collapse of the Second Empire. The Third Republic sprang up, it vowed to fight on, but did so rather badly, and by January 28th, the Germans took Paris and the French surrendered again. That led to the rise of the Paris Commune, and in fact the French didn't completely surrender to the Germans until May of 1871 because they were too busy fighting each other, which is sort of a sad commentary on France's performance in recent wars. And it's easy to make fun of the French. When you look at their leadership in the Franco-Prussian War, you can see the only thing worse than having the French army led by French generals is to have it led by French politicians, including Léon Gambetta. But I don't want to be too hard on the French. It's really sad to see what happened to a great nation, extraordinary culturally, in literature, and to be honest, better governed than most of the world. But too much of that government, too much centralization gradually reduced France from a first-rank power to a second-rank power, and by 1870, it wasn't clear how firm a grip they even had on that status. But nobody could believe it, least of all the French. In fact, you see this when they're losing the Franco-Prussian War. One of their problems is they can't believe they're losing it. They go, who is this Prussian upstart who dares to think he can beat us? And yet, attempt after attempt to create new armies or have the francs-tireurs, the guerrillas, none of it worked. The Germans just kept winning and French armies kept getting dispersed. And finally, they had to face facts. Yeah, we really did lose. But what do you do next? Well, if you're the Germans, you should do a victory dance, parade through Paris, take Alsace-Lorraine, and then create the German Empire. And you become the big boy on the block. But what do the British do? For centuries, they've been trying to keep Europe in balance, keep the scorpions inside the bottle fighting each other instead of having one of them eat all the others, get so big it crawls out and stings Britain. So now they need a rapprochement with France. They've also got to figure out some way to ally themselves with Russia, which couldn't be a less reliable ally if it was deliberate state policy, though if it had been deliberate state policy, in fact, it probably would have made them more reliable. And so they try to cobble together this kind of entente, and they do succeed, and I'll give credit to the French as well as the British for having overcome their ancient enmity. But it wasn't enough. Germany was still too strong for France. As somebody would later say, poor Germany, too big for Europe, too small for the world. But there were people who didn't realize what had happened, and it wasn't just the French. Also, with some notable exceptions, the Americans. They didn't understand the peril that Germany would dominate Europe, or that if Germany dominated Europe, it would be a threat to the world. If the United States had stood more firmly against German ambitions before World War I, including if Theodore Roosevelt had been elected in 1912 instead of Woodrow Wilson, the world would have been spared untold horrors. And the same is true, of course, of the American failure really to engage in the affairs of Europe in the 1930s, when again people thought France is a great power. They'll fight Germany to a standstill. Well, no, France hadn't been a great power since before 1870. The Franco-Prussian War didn't break France from the rank of major powers. It revealed that it was no longer in it. And the lesson for all of us here is not look out for Prussia, because I think Prussia's kind of denatured as a threat to the world by this point anyway. It's beware of geopolitical imbalances, of pretending the old order is still intact when it's not. Beware of vacuums that may draw in rising powers that are not our friends. Because if the French had to surrender 3 times in the Franco-Prussian War, it's a warning that things can go really badly if you don't understand that the bad guys are getting too strong for your allies in other parts of the world. Barack Obama, are you listening?